In 2026, one immigration mistake will get you sent home at the airport, and 90% of travelers don't know it's coming. I'm about to show you the exact document that customs officers will demand starting next year, the 3 questions that trip up even experienced travelers, and why your current passport strategy might not work anymore. But here's what nobody's telling you. There's a simple checklist that gets you through any immigration line in under 5 minutes, and I'm giving it to you at the end of this video. Stay with me, because what changes in 2026 will either ruin your trip or make it the smoothest you've ever had, depending on whether you know these updates or not. The first major change coming in 2026 is something you may have already encountered in limited form at certain airports. Biometric screening, specifically facial recognition technology, is moving from pilot programs to standard procedure at major hubs across the United States, Europe, and Asia. The idea behind it is straightforward. Instead of handing your passport to an officer who visually compares your face to the photo, you'll walk up to a camera station that scans your face and matches it against the biometric data stored in your passport chip. If the match is successful, which usually takes just a few seconds, you proceed to your gate or through customs without any human interaction. Several airports have been testing this system for the past few years. Atlanta's Hartsfield, Jackson, Dallas-Fort Worth, and London Heathrow all have biometric gates in operation right now, primarily for international arrivals and departures. The technology works remarkably well under ideal conditions. You approach the camera, it captures your image, compares it to your passport photo and any previous biometric data on file, and clears you to continue. For travelers comfortable with this technology, it's noticeably faster than traditional document checks, especially during peak travel times when human-staffed lines can stretch for 30 minutes or more. But there are legitimate concerns that deserve honest discussion. The first is privacy. Your facial biometric data is being captured, stored, and potentially shared between government agencies and international databases. Different countries have different policies about how long they retain this information and what they're permitted to do with it. The United States system, for example, keeps biometric data for a limited time before deletion, at least according to current policy. But policies can change, and once your biometric information exists in a database, you have limited control over how it's used in the future. The second concern is accuracy. Facial recognition technology has improved dramatically, but it's not perfect. Studies have shown that these systems can have higher error rates for certain demographic groups, particularly older adults, people with darker skin tones, and individuals whose current appearance differs significantly from their passport photo. If you've gained or lost substantial weight, changed your hairstyle dramatically, or your passport photo is several years old, the system might not recognize you immediately. When that happens, you're directed to a secondary screening line for manual verification. Which brings us to the third issue, opting out. In 2026, many airports will still offer a traditional document check lane for travelers who prefer not to use biometric screening. However, these lanes are expected to have significantly fewer staff members and longer wait times as resources shift toward the automated systems. Choosing to opt out might be your right, but it will likely cost you time, potentially a lot of it. For travelers with tight connections or limited mobility who can't afford to stand in slow-moving lines, the practical choice may be to accept biometric screening even if they're not entirely comfortable with it. The advice here is to be realistic about what's coming. Biometric screening is not a temporary experiment. It represents the direction global aviation security is moving. Driven by the need to process increasing numbers of passengers with limited staffing, by 2026, it will be the default method at most major international airports. If you have concerns about privacy or accuracy, educate yourself about the specific policies at airports you'll be using. Understand your rights regarding opting out, but also understand the practical consequences of exercising those rights. And make sure your passport photo is recent and clear. If you're due for a renewal in the next year or two, consider doing it sooner rather than later, so your biometric data matches your current appearance as closely as possible. Remember when carry-on luggage was free, and the only real restriction was whether it fit in the overhead bin? That era is ending, replaced by a system where airlines are finding increasingly creative ways to charge for the space that used to be included in your ticket price. The changes rolling out in 2026 take this trend to new levels. And if you're not prepared, they could add significant costs to every flight you take. Several budget carriers in Europe and a growing number of US airlines are implementing digital bag scanners at check-in counters and boarding gates. These devices automatically measure your carry-on's dimensions with precision that eliminates any ambiguity. If your bag exceeds the airline's stated limits by even a centimeter, the system flags it. No discretion, no negotiation, no squeezing it to make it fit. You either pay the fee to check it, or you don't board. The scanners remove the human element entirely, which is exactly what airlines want. It's harder to argue with a machine, but the real change isn't just stricter enforcement of existing size limits. It's the introduction of a new fare category that several airlines are testing: Personal item-only tickets. Under this model, your ticket includes one small item that must fit under the seat in front of you, typically something around 18 by 14 by 8 inches. Anything larger, including what we traditionally think of as a carry-on suitcase, costs extra. That fee varies by airline and route, but it generally ranges from $40 to $80 each way. For a family of 3 taking a round-trip vacation, you could easily spend an additional $500 just to bring normal carry-on bags. Passengers who can travel with just a backpack or small duffel get a lower base fare, while those who need more space pay for it. But in practice, most travelers need more than what fits under a seat, especially on trips longer than a weekend. The result is that the advertised ticket price becomes increasingly disconnected from what you actually pay. You see a fare that looks reasonable, click through to book it, and discover that bringing luggage costs almost as much as the flight itself. Some carriers are going even further, testing a system where overhead bin access becomes a paid upgrade. Southwest Airlines built their reputation on letting everyone board with 2 free bags. But even they've hinted at reconsidering that policy if competitive pressures continue. The economic logic is clear. Overhead bin space is limited, and airlines can monetize it the same way they monetize checked bags, seat selection, and everything else that used to be standard. What can you do about this? First, become ruthlessly efficient at packing light. Invest in a well-designed personal item bag, something structured enough to maximize the allowable dimensions, but soft-sided enough to compress slightly if needed. Packing cubes help organize clothing in ways that minimize wasted space. Choose versatile clothing items that work for multiple situations rather than packing separate outfits for every occasion. If you're traveling somewhere you can do laundry, pack even less, and plan to wash clothes mid-trip. Second, weigh your bags at home before you leave. Some airlines now enforce weight limits on carry-ons, typically around 15 pounds. In addition to size restrictions, a small digital luggage scale costs less than $20 and can save you from surprise fees at the airport. Know your bag's weight, and if you're close to the limit, shift heavier items to your personal item or checked luggage strategically. Third, understand the specific policies of every airline you fly. Budget carriers usually have the strictest rules, but legacy carriers are increasingly adopting similar policies for their basic economy fares. Check the airline's website directly, not third-party booking sites, because the most current baggage information lives on the carrier's own pages. If you're booking through a travel agent or online platform, verify the baggage allowance before you finalize the purchase. Finally, consider whether paying for checked luggage might actually make more sense than trying to cram everything into a carry-on. This goes against decades of travel wisdom that taught us to avoid checked bags at all costs, but the math has changed. If checking a bag costs $30 and bringing an oversized carry-on costs $50 in gate fees, checking becomes the smarter financial choice. You also avoid the stress of finding overhead space on crowded flights and the physical strain of lifting heavy bags. The broader truth is that airlines have systematically unbundled the flying experience over the past 2 decades. And baggage represents one of their most reliable revenue streams. The trend will continue, not reverse. Adapting your packing habits and travel strategy to this reality will save you money and frustration in the long run. Not every change coming in 2026 is designed to squeeze more money from travelers. Some represent genuine improvements, and the most significant of these is the continued rollout of next-generation CT scanners at airport security checkpoints. If you've been traveling for any length of time, you remember the introduction of the liquid restrictions after 2006, when suddenly you couldn't bring a full-size bottle of anything through security. That rule, officially called the 311 policy, has been one of the most consistently annoying aspects of air travel for nearly 2 decades, but it's finally on its way out. The technology enabling this change is computed tomography scanning, the same imaging technique used in medical settings. These advanced scanners create detailed 3-dimensional images of your bag's contents, allowing security officers to identify threats with far greater accuracy than the older 2-dimensional X-ray systems. The critical difference is that they can determine what a liquid actually is, not just that it's liquid. A bottle of water looks different from a bottle of explosive material at the molecular level, and CT scanners can detect that difference. Airports in the United Kingdom and European Union have been installing these scanners steadily, and several have already lifted the liquid restrictions entirely at checkpoints equipped with the new technology. You can walk through security with full-sized shampoo, lotion, or beverages without removing them from your bag or placing them in a plastic bag. You can also leave your laptop and tablet in your carry-on rather than pulling them out for separate screening. The process is genuinely faster and less stressful, and once you've experienced it, going back to the old system feels archaic. The Transportation Security Administration in the United States is working toward the same goal, but the implementation is happening gradually. As of now, some checkpoints at major airports have CT scanners, while others still use the older equipment. By the end of 2026, TSA expects to have the technology deployed much more widely, though probably not at every checkpoint nationwide. Smaller regional airports will take longer to upgrade due to budget constraints and lower passenger volumes that make the investment harder to justify. Another improvement tied to these scanners is shoe screening. The requirement to remove your shoes dates back to the 2001 incident involving explosives hidden in footwear. For most travelers, it's been an inconvenience ever since, particularly for older adults who struggle with balance or mobility. The new CT scanners can analyze shoes while you're wearing them, detecting anomalies without requiring removal. By 2026, most travelers at upgraded checkpoints will be able to keep their shoes on during screening, with exceptions only for those wearing particularly thick-soled boots or shoes that trigger alerts. However, and this is important, not every airport will have these capabilities simultaneously. If you're flying from a major hub like Denver or Miami to a smaller regional airport, you might pass through an upgraded checkpoint in one direction and a traditional one on the return. International travel adds even more variability. Your departing airport might have CT scanners, but your destination might not, and you'll need to comply with whichever system is in place. The same applies to connecting flights through different countries. The practical advice is to continue following the traditional liquid restrictions unless you're certain your specific airport has lifted them. Check the airport's website before your trip, looking for announcements about security procedures. If you can't find clear information, assume the old rules still apply. It's better to pack travel-sized toiletries you don't end up needing than to arrive at security with full bottles that get confiscated. As more airports complete their upgrades throughout 2026 and beyond, the confusion will gradually disappear and the improved system will become standard. But we're still in the transition period, and that requires flexibility. The larger point is that airport security, despite its reputation for being intrusive and inconvenient, does evolve in response to both threats and technology. The liquid restrictions served a legitimate purpose when they were introduced, but they're no longer necessary given current screening capabilities. The willingness of security agencies to remove outdated rules when better methods exist is actually encouraging. It suggests that the system isn't just piling on restrictions indefinitely, but rather adapting based on what actually improves safety and efficiency. One of the more ambitious changes scheduled for 2026 is the expanded use of digital travel credentials, essentially making your smartphone a substitute for your physical passport in certain situations. The technology behind this has been in development for years, and several airlines and airports have run pilot programs testing its viability. The concept is elegant. Your passport information, biometric data, and visa status are all stored securely on your phone. When you check in, pass through security, or board your flight, you present your phone instead of your physical documents. The system verifies your identity using facial recognition, confirms your credentials are valid, and lets you proceed. Delta, United, and British Airways are among the carriers actively developing these systems, and they work remarkably well in the controlled environments where they've been tested. You approach a gate equipped with biometric verification. The camera captures your face, your phone's digital credential confirms you're authorized to board that specific flight, and the gate opens. No fumbling for boarding passes, no worrying about print quality or barcode scanning issues. For frequent travelers who've experienced the frustration of paper boarding passes that won't scan or mobile passes that won't load at the crucial moment, the appeal is obvious. The United States is also upgrading its passport infrastructure to support this shift. The next generation of e-passports being issued starting in 2026 will include enhanced chips designed to work seamlessly with digital credential systems. These chips store more data, use more sophisticated encryption, and can communicate with smartphone apps in ways previous passport generations couldn't. The State Department is positioning this as a modernization that brings American travel documents in line with international standards, while also enabling future conveniences like phone-based verification. But before we get too enthusiastic about the convenience, we need to talk about the risks. Your smartphone becoming your primary travel document creates a significant vulnerability. What happens if you lose your phone? It gets stolen, the battery dies, or it malfunctions while you're abroad. With a physical passport, you at least have a tangible document that doesn't depend on battery life or working electronics. Losing it is still serious, but replacing it through an embassy or consulate is a well-established process. Losing access to a digital credential on a phone that won't turn on creates complications that travel infrastructure isn't fully prepared to handle yet. Different travelers will have different comfort levels with this technology. Younger travelers who've grown up managing their entire lives through smartphones might embrace digital credentials immediately. Older travelers who prefer physical documents and have experienced the frustration of technology failing at inconvenient moments will likely be more hesitant. The good news is that, at least in 2026, digital credentials will be optional rather than mandatory. Your physical passport will still be accepted, still be valid, and in most situations still be required as a backup, even if you're using digital credentials as your primary method. The smart approach is to prepare for both systems. When you renew your passport, make sure you're getting the newest version with the upgraded chip. Even if you don't plan to use digital credentials right away, download your airline's app and familiarize yourself with how it handles boarding passes and document storage. If your airline offers digital credential enrollment, consider trying it on a domestic flight where the stakes are lower if something goes wrong. But always carry your physical passport when traveling internationally. Keep it in a secure location, separate from your phone, ideally with a backup photocopy stored in another bag or emailed to yourself. There's also the practical matter of battery life. If your phone is serving as your boarding pass, your digital credential, your communication device, your camera, and your entertainment system, it's going to drain quickly. Invest in a reliable portable charger and keep it fully charged. Make sure you can access your boarding pass and credential information even in airplane mode or with limited connectivity. Screenshot critical information so it's available offline. And consider the old-fashioned wisdom of arriving at the airport with your phone at 100% battery rather than scrambling to find charging stations. The transition to digital credentials represents a fundamental shift in how we prove identity and authorization to travel. It's coming whether individual travelers embrace it or not. Driven by airlines' desire to reduce costs, governments' interest in better tracking and security, and technology companies' push to make smartphones even more central to daily life, understanding how it works, what the benefits are, and what the risks are, puts you in a position to use it effectively when it makes sense for your situation. Here's an aspect of the 2026 changes that won't get announced with fanfare or explained in airline press releases, but will definitely affect your wallet. Airports and airlines worldwide are implementing increased taxes, fees, and surcharges that quietly raise the cost of flying even when the base ticket price seems reasonable. These charges go by various names: environmental levies, facility fees, passenger duty increases, fuel recovery charges, but they all have the same effect. They make your trip more expensive in ways that aren't obvious until you're looking at the final bill. The United Kingdom has already confirmed an increase in air passenger duty taking effect in 2026. This tax applies to every passenger departing from a UK airport, with the amount varying based on the flight's distance and the cabin class. For economy passengers on long-haul flights, the increase amounts to about £15 to £20 per person. That might not sound dramatic until you're booking tickets for a family, at which point it adds £60 or £80 to your trip cost without providing any additional service or value. Several European Union nations are implementing similar environmental surcharges, justified as necessary to offset aviation's carbon footprint and fund sustainable transportation alternatives. France has a solidarity tax on plane tickets. Germany is considering increases to its aviation tax. The European Union as a whole continues to include aviation in its emissions trading system, and those costs get passed through to passengers. Again, each individual charge might seem modest, but they accumulate across multiple flights and multiple family members. The United States hasn't announced specific federal tax increases for 2026, but airports themselves are raising fees to fund infrastructure improvements. Nearly every major airport in the country has ongoing or planned renovation projects, new terminals, expanded security checkpoints, modernized baggage systems. Those improvements cost billions of dollars, and much of that cost is recovered through passenger facility charges that appear on your ticket. These fees are capped at relatively low amounts per flight, typically under $10, but they apply to every segment of your journey, and they're non-negotiable. The frustrating part of all this is how the charges are presented. When you search for flights online, you see an initial price that looks competitive. It's only when you click through to the final booking page that you see the full breakdown: base fare plus taxes, plus fees, plus carrier surcharges, plus everything else. By that point, you've invested time in the search, you might have found a convenient schedule, and the psychological momentum pushes you toward completing the purchase, even though the final price is significantly higher than you expected. Airlines understand this psychology perfectly, which is why they structure pricing this way. What can you do to minimize the impact? First, always look at the final all-in price when comparing flights, not just the advertised base fare. If one airline shows a $100 ticket, that becomes $200 after fees, and another shows a $150 ticket that becomes $180 after fees, the second option is actually cheaper, despite the higher initial price. Many booking sites now require airlines to show total costs up front. But not all, and international bookings especially can have surprise charges that don't appear until late in the process. Second, use credit cards that offer travel benefits and statement credits. Some premium travel cards provide annual credits that can offset airline fees, TSA pre-check, or global entry enrollment, or checked baggage charges. If you travel even moderately frequently, these benefits can return value that justifies the card's annual fee. Look specifically for cards that reimburse passenger facility charges or environmental fees, as those are becoming increasingly common and unavoidable. Third, consider airport lounge memberships or day passes if you fly often enough. This sounds counterintuitive since lounges themselves cost money, but many premium credit cards include lounge access as a benefit. If you're facing delays or long layovers in airports where food and beverages have become extremely expensive, having access to a lounge where those things are included can save money while also providing a more comfortable experience. Some lounges also help offset baggage fees or provide other travel benefits. The broader trend here is that the true cost of air travel is being obscured through fee structures that break the price into dozens of small charges rather than one transparent figure. This benefits airlines and airports by making prices appear more competitive than they actually are, while making it harder for consumers to comparison shop effectively. Understanding this reality and learning to navigate it doesn't make the fees go away, but it does help you make more informed decisions and avoid surprises that turn an affordable trip into an expensive one. Now, let's address the part of travel that creates the most anxiety for many people, even those who've been flying for decades. Standing in the immigration line, waiting to be called forward, watching the officer examine passports and ask questions, wondering what they might ask you and whether your answer will sound suspicious somehow. These moments feel high stakes because, in a sense, they are. The immigration officer has the authority to admit you to the country or deny you entry, and while denials are rare for legitimate travelers, the possibility creates stress. The first question almost everyone faces is about the purpose of their visit. Why are you here? What brings you to our country? The officer isn't making conversation. They're verifying that your stated reason for travel matches your visa type, your documentation, and the story they expect based on your travel history. If you're entering on a tourist visa, the correct answer is simple and direct. I'm here on vacation. I'm visiting for tourism. I'm here to see family. Don't elaborate unless asked. Don't mention anything that could be construed as work, business meetings, job interviews, or extended stays. Even innocent comments like "I might check out some networking events while I'm here" can raise red flags if you're supposed to be a tourist. The second question addresses how long you plan to stay. This tests whether you intend to respect your visa limits and leave when you're supposed to. If your visa allows 30 days and you plan to stay for 2 weeks, say 2 weeks. If your itinerary is flexible, choose a reasonable time frame and stick with it. Don't say things like "I'm not sure yet" or maybe longer depending on how it goes. Uncertainty makes officers wonder whether you understand the visa requirements or plan to overstay. Have your return ticket accessible on your phone or printed out. Being able to show proof that you've already booked your departure flight instantly addresses any concerns about your intentions. The third common question asks where you'll be staying. This proves you've planned your trip and aren't arriving with no arrangements, which could suggest different intentions than tourism. If you're staying with family or friends, provide their name and city. You don't need the full address memorized unless specifically asked, though having it written down or saved in your phone is smart. If you're staying at a hotel, give the name and location. If your accommodations are flexible, at least have your first few nights booked and ready to show confirmation. Saying you're still figuring out where to stay sounds unprepared and invites additional questions. Related to that is the return ticket question, which might be asked explicitly or might be implied by other questions. Do you have a return ticket? When are you leaving? How will you get home? This is arguably the most important question in the entire immigration interview because it demonstrates clear evidence of your intent to depart. If you have a return ticket, mention it immediately and be ready to show it. If your travel plans are genuinely open-ended, consider booking a fully refundable ticket or a cheap onward ticket to a neighboring country just to have something to show. Never say you'll figure out your return later or that you're thinking about extending indefinitely. That's the fastest way to trigger a secondary inspection. Officers also commonly ask about your employment. What do you do for work? Are you employed? This isn't about judging your career. It's about establishing financial stability and reducing the likelihood that you're planning to work illegally in their country. Answer clearly and honestly. I'm retired. I work in accounting. I own a small consulting business. If you're between jobs, that's fine, but be prepared to explain briefly how you're funding your trip. You might mention savings, retirement income, family support, or an inheritance. The goal is to demonstrate you have legitimate means to support yourself during your visit and won't need to find work. Another question that surprises people is about how much money you're carrying. This isn't about taxing you or judging whether you can afford the trip, though financial capacity is part of what they're assessing. Primarily, they're checking for money laundering or smuggling. Most countries allow up to $10,000 in undeclared cash. If you're carrying more, you're required to declare it, and failing to do so can result in confiscation and fines. But you don't need to have cash on hand at all to answer this confidently. Explain that you have credit cards, a debit card, and sufficient funds to cover your stay. If asked for proof, a bank statement or account balance, screenshot usually satisfies them. The question about whether you packed your own bags is a security screening. Making sure nobody could have slipped contraband or dangerous items into your luggage without your knowledge. Always answer that yes, you packed everything yourself. If someone helped you, be honest about who and how, but make clear that you're aware of everything in your bags. This isn't the time for a detailed story about how your spouse did the toiletries while you packed the clothes. Just confirm you know what you're carrying and you're responsible for it. They'll often ask if you're traveling alone or with others. This helps them build a complete picture of your travel plans. If you're with family, say so clearly. If you're traveling alone, that's perfectly normal and acceptable. Just state it simply. The officer is checking whether your answer matches your booking information, your luggage patterns, and the overall story you're presenting. Consistency matters more than the specific answer. A potentially tricky question asks about whether you have family or friends in the country you're visiting. This is fine to acknowledge. You're visiting your daughter, your cousin invited you for a wedding, you have friends from college who live there now. What you want to avoid is creating the impression that you're planning to stay with them permanently or that your tourist visa is a pretext for moving. Make clear that you're visiting for a specific period and then returning home. If asked, have their contact information available, but don't volunteer more than necessary. Finally, there's the declaration question. Do you have anything to declare? This applies to items that might be restricted, taxed, or prohibited. Many travelers think this only means expensive purchases or large quantities of alcohol, but it can include food, plants, certain medications, or items made from protected species. The rules vary by country, so check before you fly. If you're unsure whether something needs to be declared, ask. Saying "I'm not sure if this needs to be declared" shows honesty and awareness. Immigration officers respect travelers who make good faith efforts to comply. What they don't respect is discovering prohibited items during inspection after you claim to have nothing to declare. A bonus question you might encounter if you've visited the country before is when that previous visit occurred. They already know the answer from your passport stamps and their computer systems. They're testing whether you'll be honest. Don't try to hide previous visits or lie about dates. If you can't remember exactly, that's fine. Say something like, "I visited about 2 years ago," or "I was here last summer." Approximate answers are acceptable as long as they're roughly accurate. What matters is that you're not contradicting their records. Throughout all of these questions and interactions, there's a single underlying factor that determines whether your immigration experience is smooth or stressful. It's not about memorizing perfect answers or having every possible document printed out. It's about consistency and confidence. Immigration officers are trained to detect stress, evasiveness, and contradictions. They've seen thousands of travelers, and they have excellent instincts for when something doesn't add up. What they're really looking for isn't perfection, it's coherence. Does your story make sense? Do your answers match your documents? Does your demeanor suggest you're a legitimate traveler who knows why they're there and when they're leaving? This is why preparing a mental framework for your trip is more valuable than rehearsing specific answers. Know your itinerary well enough that you can describe it naturally. Have your key documents, return ticket, accommodation, confirmation, travel insurance, accessible but not frantically searched for. Understand the purpose of your visit clearly enough that you can explain it in one sentence. These preparations create genuine confidence, which translates into body language and tone that officers immediately recognize as authentic. Conversely, travelers who haven't thought about these basics often stumble over simple questions, not because they're hiding anything, but because they genuinely don't know their return date or can't remember their hotel name or haven't thought about how to explain their trip purpose. That uncertainty reads as suspicious even when it's just poor planning. 5 minutes of preparation before your flight, mentally reviewing where you're going, why, for how long, and where you're staying, prevents that uncertainty. If you ever find yourself getting nervous during an immigration interview, remember that thousands of people pass through that same checkpoint every day, and the vast majority have unremarkable experiences. The officer isn't trying to trick you or catch you in a lie. They're doing a job that requires them to verify certain information efficiently. Your role is to provide that information clearly and honestly. It's not an adversarial interaction unless you make it one. Treat it as a professional exchange where someone needs specific answers, you provide them, and both of you move on with your day. Now, as promised, here's the practical framework that makes all of this manageable. Before every international trip, go through this mental and physical checklist. It takes less than 10 minutes, but addresses the most common sources of stress and surprise at airports and immigration. First, verify your passport validity. Many countries require at least 6 months of remaining validity from your date of entry, not your date of departure. If your passport expires within a year, renew it now rather than waiting until the last minute. Check that your passport photo still resembles you reasonably well. If you've changed significantly, consider renewing even if there's time remaining. Second, confirm your visa requirements and ensure any necessary visas are obtained well in advance. Some countries offer visa on arrival, but policies change. And you don't want to discover you needed advance approval while you're standing at the airport? For destinations that don't require visas for short tourist stays, understand the length of stay permitted and the restrictions on your activities. Third, book your return or onward travel and keep confirmation accessible on your phone and print it. Even if your plans might change, having a ticket demonstrates intent to leave and removes one of the biggest sources of immigration scrutiny. Make sure the return date falls within your visa or permitted stay duration. Fourth, arrange your accommodation for at least the first few nights and save confirmation in your phone. Know the name and location of where you're staying. If staying with friends or family, have their contact information ready. Fifth, prepare your financial documentation. This doesn't mean carrying account statements to immigration, but knowing how you'll answer questions about supporting yourself. Credit cards, bank apps, showing current balances, and a general understanding of your trip budget all contribute to confident answers. Sixth, review your luggage contents for items that need declaration. Check the specific rules for your destination country regarding food, medications, amounts of cash, tobacco, alcohol, and any other restricted items. When in doubt, declare it. The consequences of undeclared prohibited items are far worse than the minor inconvenience of declaring something that turns out to be fine. Seventh, organize your electronics and batteries. Make sure power banks show their capacity rating, keep all batteries and carry-on luggage, and verify that your devices can be powered on if asked. Remove or properly store any batteries from smart luggage. Eighth, check your airline's current baggage policies, not what they were the last time you flew, but what they are right now. Measure and weigh your carry-on at home. Verify whether your ticket includes checked bags or whether that costs extra. Ninth, look up your departure and arrival airports online. Check whether they've implemented biometric screening, CT scanners that eliminate liquid restrictions, or any other procedural changes. Read recent reviews or forum posts from travelers who've passed through recently to get a sense of what to expect. 10th, screenshot or print your boarding pass, booking confirmation, hotel reservation, and any other critical documents. Keep them in a folder on your phone that's accessible offline. Email copies to yourself. This redundancy means that if one system fails, your phone won't load the app. The printer at the hotel wasn't working, you still have access to the information. This checklist isn't exhaustive, and your specific circumstances might require additional preparation. But these 10 items address the vast majority of situations where travelers run into problems. They give you confidence because you know you've covered the basics. They prevent surprises because you've thought through the potential questions and requirements ahead of time. And they demonstrate the kind of preparation that immigration officers immediately recognize as the mark of a legitimate, organized traveler. The world remains full of places worth seeing, people worth visiting, and experiences worth having. The airports and immigration checkpoints are simply the doorways you pass through to reach them. Make those passages smooth through preparation and understanding, and the journey becomes what it should always be. Not an obstacle course to endure, but the beginning of something worth remembering. Safe travels, and may every trip you take in 2026 and beyond be exactly what you hoped it would be.